When I was 19 years old, in 1983, I had something happen to me that has left a mark on me to this very day. And I have not told anybody about this before. But now I realized that if anything is going to happen, it does not matter if I talk about it or not. I lived in the countryside with my family when I was younger. There were 6 of us, 4 kids and my parents. I'm the youngest child, so I was left out of most of the family problems and drama. My grandparents lived in the house next to ours, so they kind of raised me as well, because my parents were at work a lot of the time. There was a large field around my house, surrounded by the forest that my grandmother took me to all the time. We would just sit there in the sun and have picnics together. We stopped doing that when I was older though, obviously, and later, I went there with my friends to smoke cigarettes that we had stolen from our parents. It was like our hangout spot. A lot of people gathered around here sometimes, and I have a lot of great memories from that place. But one memory that will forever keep me from it, and even my hometown. I avoid it as much as I can nowadays, and have for the last 30-something years. When I was 19, I was kind of a rebel. I didn't want to put up with anybody's nonsense, including my parents, and as I was the youngest child, I must admit I was quite spoiled. All of my siblings had moved out by then, and one night, my father came home drunk, and they began fighting, yelling and breaking things around the house. When I realized I could do nothing to stop it, I rushed out of the house to have a smoke and was going to be back in an hour, hoping they would be done by then. It was around midnight. I figured I would go back to the field to check out if anybody else was hanging out there, be there for an hour, then get back. But when I got there, there was nobody else there. It didn't bother me though. I could still chill alone and have a few cigarettes before heading back. As I was working on my first one, I saw the sky suddenly light up. I'd never seen anything like it, and I don't know if I was more scared or confused at that moment. It was like there was lightning somewhere in the distance, but I could not see it. I could only see the purple sky, and I could hear no thunder. Staring at it, I noticed a bright circle approaching me from the sky. At first, I thought it could have been some government business or something. But why would they be doing it in an abandoned field that had no meaning or value at all? Then I realized it was too bright, and I probably could not handle it approaching me any closer, so I began running away. I did not make it 10 meters away before hearing the flying object open up behind me. I stopped in my tracks, closing my eyes and praying to God to save me from whatever was coming. I turned around, and what I saw will never leave my mind. It has and will haunt me in my dreams and in my head forever. I know everyone is going to think I'm crazy after saying it, but it was nothing else than an alien. It didn't look like exactly what had been described in sightings and stories. It was green, but it somehow didn't seem like a creature, but more like a being. Light was going through it, but reflecting it at the same time. I felt like if I touched it with my hand, it would go through it. But I knew what it was. It was as if it planted in my head, so I didn't have any doubts if it was real. Even though I knew it was not possible, and did not believe in the supernatural. The last thing I remember is that this thing telling me not to be afraid, but without opening its mouth, which terrified me to my bones, all for a second before I passed out. When I woke, I was in the middle of the field, surrounded by my friends asking me what had happened and what I was doing there. But all I wanted to do was scream, because I could not remember. And even worse, from what I remembered last, I couldn't talk or listen to anybody, so I ran home, and the first thing I did was drink almost a liter of water in less than a minute. I felt dehydrated and disgusting. When my parents came home that night, I didn't know what to tell them. I didn't know or have the words to explain what had happened, so I just kept my mouth closed. For an entire week, I did not speak to anybody. My parents felt guilty, because they had been fighting that night and they literally begged me to tell them what was wrong, but I just could not. And then I realized that I must continue on with my life. I wasn't going to get anything by being silent forever, and I needed to be strong if I wanted to survive. After all, God only knew what was going to happen to me next. I never mentioned this to anybody in my life. I was scared that if I talked about it, it would become more real, or that it would happen again. But now I know that was a mistake. I should not have worn the weight of this on my shoulders for so long now. I feel free. Whatever comes next, I am more than ready to face it. My friend has a pretty wild hunting story when he was deep in the woods of Iowa. This was back in 2009, and he's told me this story so many times. The details never change, so I believe him. He said he was deer hunting when he heard something large crashing through the woods. He got up to take a look. He saw what looked like a large dog, but could not make out any details because it was dark and early in the morning. He forgot to bring his flashlight, but whatever it was headed right in his direction. He decided now was a good time to leave. After he did, he heard it coming for him. He turned and started running. He said the most terrifying thing was, like any normal animal, it was not on 4 legs. This was 2, or bipedal. He couldn't make out any of the details, though, other than that. He said he had to stop running because he was out of breath. He looked back and couldn't see where the thing was, so he started going again, but he kept hearing it coming after him, keeping up with him, not running to him or grabbing him, but almost like it was toying with him, paralleling him in the woods, or keeping up right behind him. He was running so fast, he almost fell, hitting his head on a tree stump. He looked back and saw it standing still. He could see the shape, but could not make out any details. But whatever it is must have terrified him. He said it was large, standing on 2 legs, and it had a large snout. Then he said it turned off and disappeared. By the time he got back to his truck, he was pretty shaken up and vomited. I don't know, maybe if he had come into that thing's territory or what somehow, but I don't think he would have made up that story. He's usually a pretty honest guy and would never lie to me. And I say usually lightly. I've never once heard him lie, or make up a story at all. In fact, I don't see any reason for him to. He has nothing to gain from this. And every time he relives the story, you can just see the fear and terror in his eyes. He hates retelling it, but I always make him bring it up. Anyway, that's his story. And personally, I don't know what it could have been. The fact that he mentioned it had a large snout and looked more like a large wolf is very concerning to me. That sort of alpha predator is out there somewhere in the woods. I mean, I thought he was talking about a Bigfoot, but this is something else entirely. It really makes you wonder what's really out there. I'm a 27-year-old male who works as a paramedic in Iowa. I was born here, and have never felt the need to travel far from home. About a year ago, I was having a very hard time at work. I eventually developed depression from being exposed to human suffering virtually all the time, especially after losing 3 to 5 patients in a short window. I was prescribed medication and then sent to therapy. Things were slowly beginning to get better. During my therapy sessions, my therapist had asked me if there was anything that had happened recently that might have had a hand in my depression. At first, I could not think of anything. But then I remembered an incident from about 5 months prior. I was driving home from work one night and decided to take a different route than normal. I was driving down a rural road that I'd never been on before, and as I was driving, I saw something in the woods next to the road. It was huge, at least the size of a cow, and it was all black. The strangest thing about it was its shape. It kind of looked like a large man with very long arms. It stood very still in the dark, but I could tell that it didn't have any facial features, at least none that were discernible, and it seemed to be completely dark, except for small bits of white underneath its face. At this point, I decided to ignore it, driving away, but I've never been able to really let go of what I saw fully. after telling my therapist this story. She recommended that I read up on the skinwalker legend. I never heard of it before, but after reading more about it, I was convinced that what I had seen, the description of this being, matched exactly what I had, at least somewhat. I can't think of any other rational explanation for it, and now I was beginning to understand the skinwalker legend. I felt like talking about my experience might help me move forward. Since we aren't allowed to talk about our off-duty time at work, we don't have much contact with our coworkers outside. It has been hard to find somebody to talk to about this who will listen. I've recently begun a support group for first responders who deal with any type of trauma. I'm hoping that by sharing my own story, I can encourage or help somebody else who might be struggling. Iowa, I feel, is generally a pretty quiet state. There's a little bit happening outside of farming communities, but when this encounter took place, it was happening in a place that is well known for lots of paranormal activity, with some of our more famous ghost pictures being taken there. The area is also known for UFO sightings, and there have been a few Bigfoot sightings in the area as well. The area itself is a large wildlife refuge, with deep woods and lakes. The lake is swampy and has lots of wildlife in it. The area is a good place for encounters to happen, and one local man who grew up there told me he himself had an encounter when he was younger, a young teenager. The encounter took place in a tree stand where he was deer hunting. The area is a good area for it, with plenty of deer and turkey, as well as other wildlife. I happened to be talking with him about Bigfoot and Dogman when he mentioned his encounter. I wish I had the tape recording running at the moment. He said he was up there in the tree stand when he heard something moving fast through the brush below him. He wasn't sure what it was, but it was big, whatever it was. It walked around the tree stand and walked off into the woods. He said that he did not see it, but he could hear it. He said it sounded like a bear walking on two legs. He couldn't see it because of the brush, but like I said, he could hear it. He said he was in the blind for a few hours after, and he was glad when the sun came up so he could leave. He was glad to get out of there. I even asked him if he had been drinking or doing any drugs. No. He's as sober and clean as a whistle. He said he was just a kid and didn't know what he'd heard. He'd kind of forgotten the experience until now. But I guess apparently this encounter scared him so bad and haunted him, he does not hunt anymore. Or at least out there. I asked him if he'd ever told anybody else about it, and he had not. He's afraid of ridicule and people thinking he's crazy. I'm surprised I got him to open up, but he said he'd rather keep these kind of details to himself. Okay, so I'm a 15-year-old girl who lives in Muscatine, Iowa. The reason I'm writing this is because I have had a Dogman encounter, and I've kept it so secret. I was at a friend's house and she was gone, so I was chilling around the house. My friend's family has a pool in the backyard, and it's also fenced. It was a nice night, and the pool was well lit. So I was sitting on the edge of the pool, staring down at my phone, when suddenly, this thing that looked like a large dog hopped over the fence and glared at me. It had extremely long arms and legs that were completely disproportionate to its body. It did have a human-like face, and its fur appeared to be in patches. However, it was so strange. It had a large snout and red eyes. It was like a wolf-dog-man hybrid. It just stared. I was so afraid, I felt like I couldn't move, but when it did move, it leapt back over the fence and crashed off into the woods. I'll never forget the tree shaking violently as it leapt and disappeared. I was so shaken up. I did not tell anybody about it. I'm going to try and investigate the area where I saw it, and I'll let you know what I find. I've also had another encounter, but this time was actually with a group of friends and me. We were in a cemetery in Muscatine on Halloween night. We're just messing around, trying to scare each other. We were right near a mausoleum when we heard the sound of a dog growling. We stopped messing around and looked around, trying to find the source. Then we see this Dogman running across the cemetery. We were so freaked out that we ran to the car and left. That was my second. I've had a total of 3 encounters, if you count the first sighting. I would love to tell you more about my encounters, but for now, in this email, I think that's enough. I have also attached a picture of a Dogman that I drew. I can't draw well, but I gave it my best. Thanks for reading and good luck with your research. Oh, and also, with my first encounter, the thing climbing over the fence. The impression that it left on me was that it was trying to sneak around, but it noticed I was there. When it glared at me, it wasn't angry or hateful or hurtful. It was more of a, oh crap, I've been spotted. Now I need a segue to get out of here. And I think it panicked and quickly disappeared. Of course, it didn't exactly portray that in its bodily emotions, but I believe that's the gist of what happened. My wife and I have had a lot of encounters and experiences with Dogmen over the years. They began around 2015, and now continue on to this day. We have had several encounters on video and on audio. Our first encounter was in 2015, when my wife and I were living in a small apartment complex in southeastern Iowa. We were sitting in the living room, watching TV in the early hours of the morning, and we heard something outside the window. We looked out the window and see this 7-foot-tall werewolf thing looking back at us. We got up and left the apartment. That was our first encounter. Later on, we then moved to a house about a half-mile away. We also had a lot of encounters there too. About a year after, we moved to the house. We were in bed and were awoken by something jumping on our bed. My wife and I, panic-stricken, jump up and hit the lights. We walked around the house but did not find anything. We did not see anything. So we went back. Then we heard something walking past the window, and we heard something trying to get in through the window. We grabbed our gun, went back to the bedroom, and we see the same creature as before, this time trying to get in. So my wife shoots out the window, and this thing flees. It left a print right near the window, and the next morning, the prints were still there. The creature was this 7-foot-tall, werewolf-looking Dogman. We even called the police and they came out. They also found the tracks. The tracks were from the same creature, and they were enormous. We also had another encounter a short time after. This happened in the middle of the day. We're sitting in the dining room, looking out the window, and we see the same 7-foot-tall, werewolf-looking Dogman creature walking past our house. This time, though, it did not pay any attention to us. It just kept on walking. The thing was huge. Its chest was larger than I knew, and it had very long legs. It was also carrying something in its mouth, possibly a cat or a small dog, and it was fully bipedal, moving very quickly. Its hair was long and gangly, and its snout was also long, and had pointed ears. The thing that was strange about it, though, too, was that its tail was long, somewhat like a wolf but different. We tried to get our cameras and go outside. There were many tracks it left, but it moved back into the forest. There were also 2 sets of tracks in the snow, so I'm thinking there might be another one, or it's the same one just going back and forth between. The tracks were huge, and like I said, they were bipedal tracks. We've continued to have many encounters with these things. Dogmen. We've also had encounters with other things as well, and we're also having a lot of paranormal things happen to us, which is why we believe that this creature is drawn to my wife and I somehow. We're also encountering a lot of things with Bigfoot. We've had many encounters with them. Now, I've had to be the one to do this because my wife is too scared to come out and talk about it. I hope you can take the time to read this. It would mean a lot. Best of luck to you. So, I work as a veterinary technician, and I live in the state of Iowa. I'm 23 years old, also a female. I have always had this keen interest in the paranormal and cryptozoology, from what I'm told. At least I think that's what you call it. Anyway, when my husband and I moved to a new house about 2 years ago, I started doing some more research on local legends and myths. Shortly after moving in, we began experiencing some very freaky things. One of the first things we noticed was all the weird smells in the house. Something I could only describe as a mix between old wood and death. The smell wasn't constant, but it would just randomly show up during the day sometimes. The smell would last for about 5 weeks before finally going away completely. We also began hearing strange noises, like something knocking on the windows or scratching on the doors, but we never saw anything. It was definitely creepy. Well, one night, my husband and I were lying in bed, and we heard this loud screeching noise coming from our baby monitor. We jumped up, looked around the room, but could not see or hear anything. We turned off the monitor, and the noises ceased. A few weeks go by, and we're laying in bed again, getting a little more romantic, and we heard the baby monitor turn on by itself. We got up to check on our daughter and found that she was also sound asleep in her crib. No sounds, nothing bothering her. We have no idea how or why the monitor turned itself on, but it gave us both the spooks. Then, one night, my husband and I were in bed in the dark when we heard this weird crashing noise down in our basement. We both jumped up to go check it out. Both of us freaked. I had a butcher knife. My husband, a steel baseball bat. We got down there. Everything was quiet. We had sworn somebody broke in, but when we turned the lights on, there were no signs of any intrusion. Everything was fine and in place. There was nothing to explain the strange crashing noises. A few minutes later, after going back up upstairs and turning the lights off, we hear the noise again. So we go back down to the basement. This time, one of our Christmas decoration boxes had fallen over. We have no idea how it could have tipped over on its own. It was in the very back of the basement. There was nothing else around it, no airflow, nothing that could have possibly knocked it over. And plus, it's considerably heavy. Anyway, those are just a few examples of some weird things that have been happening. A friend of mine, who is very heavily into cryptozoology and the paranormal like me, told me about a thing called the Mothman. And after hearing about it, I almost wonder if our house is haunted by its presence. I tried to spend time looking it up online, and I guess there's a Mothman festival in downtown. My husband and I are planning on driving out there to check it out sometime this year. I like to consider myself a very avid outdoorsman, and I know animals. I've been hunting and fishing them since I was a mere child. I've never seen anything like the creature I'm about to describe to you. In the early 1990s, I was in my early 20s, a young budding man. I worked as a security guard at a casino here in Clinton, Iowa. I would often work on outside patrol, making the rounds of the parking lot. I used to go outside at night, on my own time, and walk through the nearby paths in the forest, or over by Lake Kiowa, a local nature area on the property of the casino hotel complex. It was an old habit from when I was a kid in Wisconsin, where I would explore the woods near my home. One night, in the early spring of '92, I was walking eastward on a deer trail that ran parallel to the lake. I can remember it was a cloudy night, and the temp was roughly 40 degrees Fahrenheit. It had rained earlier in the day, so the ground was wet and there were areas of standing water on the trail. I was walking with my head down, trying to not step in the mud or muck, watching very close where I was stepping. Something caught my attention out of the corner of my eye. Due to the movement, I looked up and see a large gray creature standing only about 20 yards away from me. This is just over in a clearing near the edge of the woodline. It was taller than I. I'm 6'1" and very broad-shouldered. It was there, standing firmly on 2 legs, but its arms hung close to the ground, more like that of a gorilla's. The creature had a long snout-like face and small dark eyes. It was staring at me intently, and I remember feeling an intense sense of fear. In an instant, the creature turned and ran into the woods. I chased after it, wanting to see more, but I could not keep up. The woods were thick, and the creature was moving very quickly. I shouted for help, but nobody came. I remember thinking that if I could just catch up to it, I could kill it with my knife. But I never got close. I searched for hours afterwards, but never found it again. I know what I saw, and there's no way this was a bear or any other animal that I'm familiar with. It was something completely different, something supernatural. I still think about it sometimes, and it gives me the chills. I'm glad I was not out there by myself that night. Anyway, since then, I've seen other strange things in the area. In fact, one night, while I was working at the casino, I see this large group of people dressed in black robes exiting the parking lot. When they saw me watching them, they quickly disappeared into the woods. Anyway, what do you think these creatures were? Are they a part of some sort of demon cult? Are they ghosts? I still think about that creature from the woods every now and then. But I can tell you this, it was definitely real. There's no doubts about that whatsoever. I have never really had any sort of experiences with the paranormal until about a year ago. My husband and I were at our friend's house in the country, in Iowa, talking about a Bigfoot. It's a conversation, well, a joke really, that we've had since we first met years ago. Our friend sat up straight in his chair and said, "You know, my grandma used to say something was out by our barn too." And my husband and I looked at each other with eyebrows raised, because this is his family's property. His grandma passed away a few years before. We asked him to tell us what she had said. She used to see a big black creature out by the barn, and one time, it even chased her all the way into the house. And my husband and I began laughing hysterically, because his grandma was tiny. Once he told us that, it also used to knock on the windows at night trying to get in. We were convinced that she had either lost her mind or drank too much of the stuff they brew up there. Anyway, we said our goodbyes and headed home, with him very close. About a mile from his house, we stopped at a stoplight, and I happened to look over to the house on the corner. There, standing right by the large tree, near the fencing, was this large black creature. It wasn't moving, just sort of standing there like a statue watching us. And I couldn't shake the feeling. I've never seen that being again, but something tells me it's like that story awoke it or invoked it to come alive. As a teenager, I often used to go out into the woods by myself, but after years of doing this, I began to sense something was out there watching me. I did not think much about it at first, but eventually, the intensity got so high that I began having severe panic attacks during my walks. I lived on a farm with many fields surrounding it for miles, where this thing could easily hide. And one day, when I was out in the fields near my house, I see this large creature out of the corner of my own eye. It was bipedal, covered in hair, and its eyes glowed this ominous red. It looked at me for a few moments before running into the woods. I told my family about it, and they did not believe me. A few months later, my cousin, who lived hours away, told me she had seen the same creature. The thing had been seen by many people in this area over the years. Nobody knows what it is. Some people refer to it as a devil monkey, and others a dogman. I have no idea, but it terrifies me. Anyway, that's my story. I've lived here, but I'm originally from a small town in Iowa. I was out with some friends, and we were driving down a backcountry road. This is when we saw something huge in a ditch right on the side of the road, and had to stop. I got out of the car, just to observe this thing, which was on all fours in the ditch, about 5 feet off the ground at its highest point. It had long shaggy hair, similar to that of a wolf or a werewolf, but it turned towards me and stood up like a man would. It didn't look like one, though. It was hunched over and had very muscular arms. I could see its face, although it looked sort of like a malformed face. It probably would have been too human, but this thing was too massive. Its head was large as well, sticking out from one side. The one thing that stuck out to me about this creature is that its eyes were completely black. No whites or even any color to them at all. I don't know if it had any pupils at all, because you couldn't see any. But I do know, or I could at least feel, this thing was staring right through me, like something out of a nightmare you can never get rid of. I don't believe that this thing was a ghost. I think it was maybe a Bigfoot or something. It was far too big to be a human or any normal animal. And its muscles and how it stood up like a man, it makes me believe it was something not from this earth. I'm not too sure what I saw, but I know it was something of the supernatural, and it's giving me the worst nightmares ever. The area in which we saw this is pretty rural. It's in Iowa, so surrounding by lots of fields and farmland, as far as the eye can see. There are forests too, but nothing too far by. Now, where we saw this creature was, well, no houses or anything, for miles actually. It was just us and this creature. Dark cornfields surrounded us on either side of the road. This creature, though, was easily 8 feet tall, with long shaggy hair. Did I mention its face looking distorted? And even its build was different. It seemed to be shifting in the air as if trying to determine what it were or what to do. I'm not sure if this thing was friendly, because it certainly didn't seem so. It just stood there staring at us, like it was waiting for something to happen. Either way, I hope I don't have to look at it again. My boyfriend and I, we'll call him Alex, recently purchased a home here in Iowa City. We moved into this house about 5 months ago and have been seeing some weird things every so often since. Something about the house just does not seem right. We're not sure what it is yet, but here's our account of everything we've experienced. Every time we come home late at night, after 1 in the morning, there's always usually a light on in one of the rooms upstairs that faces into the street. The room is directly above the door on the 2nd story. It's as if somebody had snuck up there during our absence. There was also an instance where one of us came home and heard what sounded like growling down in the basement. And then we also had heard footsteps walking across the floor above us, then down the stairs, like somebody was coming to greet us. The footsteps would always stop right at the front door. We've also heard what sounded like whispering our names at night, but when we go to investigate, there's nothing. We've experienced other things too, but those are the most notable. We've done a lot of research and tried to rationalize what's going on. We just can't seem to find an answer. Anyway, I'll move on to the real portion of the story. A few weeks ago, my boyfriend and I were driving around and we decided to go exploring some back roads, something we really enjoy doing. We had not been on these roads before. We came across this area that was kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and it looked like there might have been a campground there at some point, but I'm not sure. There were no signs of life, except for these strange animal carcasses. They looked like to have been mutilated. We didn't stay there for long. It was getting dark, and we began getting really creeped out by what we were seeing. We also did not want to be out here by ourselves. The place had a very ominous vibe. The next night, we're sitting there in our living room, just talking, and we hear this loud growl outside. We live on a street that's relatively somewhat busy, so it's not unusual to think it could be a big dog, but this was different. It was very deep, very guttural, and it sounded right next to the house. It kept getting louder and more intense. We ran outside but did not see anything. The noise stopped as soon as we got outside. Now, a few nights later, we're driving back home from work, from picking up my boyfriend, and we see the light on in the upstairs room again that we had been seeing. We pull into our driveway, and as we're getting out of the car, we hear this loud screeching noise, like metal scraping against metal. It was coming from the woods right behind our house. We ran around back, but did not see anything. We shined our lights. At this point, we were pretty terrified. We've been trying to figure out what's been going on, and we think it has something to do with the animal carcasses we saw the other night. We almost wonder if there's something paranormal or supernatural happening. Not just a ghost, but there's some sort of demon on the loose. We're not sure what kind of creature could do this, or why it would be targeting us, specifically us, but we're scared. We've been staying up late, trying to catch whatever this is. Nothing has happened so far. Look, I don't claim to know what it is, but there's something not right about this house, or this area. We're rationalizing it and researching it, but we can't find anything that explains truly what's going on. We begin to think it might be a demon or a poltergeist, or possibly aliens, but we're not sure. We're looking for answers. We've also been thinking about the animal carcasses a lot, and maybe there's something about it. Maybe we're attached to it somehow, or we somehow caught the energy. We're almost wondering if we somehow attached ourselves to the energy of those animal carcasses. It's just a theory. We've thought about contacting a paranormal expert or a medium, but we're scared of whatever is happening that is following us. It might be very dangerous, especially if it did whatever it did to those cow carcasses. If you're experiencing something strange and you can't explain it, I'm finding it's best not to try and rationalize it yourself, because sometimes it's hard to see things objectively when they're happening to you. If you think there might be something paranormal going on, don't stay in the house. Leave and get somewhere safe. We've also tried to think about what this could be, but we just can't come up with anything. Hopefully you have some answers. I had a very interesting story that I'd like to share with you. This happened about 3 years ago in our small town here in Iowa. I was working in a shop in town and had closed down for the evening, currently taking a break. The shop was only about a 10-minute walk to my home, but was on a road that is also near a walking trail. I decided to walk it since it was a lovely evening. As I walked, I noticed how quiet it was. There were no cars coming or going, and this made the hairs on my neck stand up. But I didn't think too much of it because I was just trying to enjoy the peace and quiet. I started to hear some growling noises, looking up in the tree line, but I did not see anything. I kept walking, and then I heard someone running, and a very large dog came running out of the tree line across the road, and then back up into the tree line. The dog was brindle color and appeared to only have one ear. It then stood up and stared in my direction for a few seconds before running back into the tree line. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. I shook off the feeling and kept walking home. About a month after this had happened, I was riding my bike out of town on the other side, getting some parts for my bike. I was about a mile out of town, on the same road that I had been on the night of my sighting. I had pulled off to the side of the road to see what was in my basket. I heard a tree branch cracking behind me. I stood up and faced, and I saw a very large dog standing on its hind legs. It was about 20 feet now in front of me, looking at me. I froze. It didn't move for about 2 minutes, and I was able to see it very well, even in the twilight. I was surprised at the color of its coat. It was a light brown color, and I was able to see its eyes clearly, and it was just staring at me. Then I heard a car coming, so the dog hurried off into the tree line. I got on my bike, pedaled as fast as I could, and never went out of town again after that. I didn't tell anybody about what I had seen for a long time, but I finally told my girlfriend about it just a few years ago. I told her about my sighting, and she asked me if I'd ever seen some of the werewolf movies. I told her I had not. She told me there had been a lot of people in the area who had sightings of Dogman. I was surprised I had not heard about it. I decided to go and try and watch as many werewolf movies as I could to try and find what was closest. I could not find one that was close to exactly what I saw, but if I had to pick one, I would probably say The Howling. During my drive home from work, on about 10:30 p.m. on a cold December night, I had to stop at a red light. My car was idling, and I was still. I heard a noise coming from the woods on my side. It almost kind of sounded like a yelp, but it got louder and louder, and also got closer. I didn't believe in the concept of werewolves back then. I pulled up, looked out my window, and I see this incredibly large dog running towards me. It looked like a mutt in the darkness. It then ran past my window, across the road, and into the woods on the other side. I was so scared I could not get my car to go back to drive. I sat there until the light turned green, and finally pulled it together, rushing home. Even though I still do not believe in werewolves or any type of shapeshifter, I know what I saw. I've never heard of any other monster running around in Iowa, but I'm sure that it's some sort of wolf monster. Me and my friends were driving around one night, looking for a place to explore, as we do. We came across this old abandoned mental hospital. We'd been there before, so we knew it was just an older building with nothing in it, besides maybe some graffiti and trash. We parked and worked our way. As soon as we got out of the car, we began hearing loud bangs and saw a green light coming from the forest. Maybe it was just somebody target practicing, but after the second time we went to investigate, we got close to where we could see the light, where it was coming from, and we all felt this weird sense of dread and panic, like something terrible would happen if we kept going. We didn't know what it was, and still, but we all had this very strong feeling of impending doom. We got out of there as quickly as possible. Now, the very next day, my cousin texted me saying he and his friends were driving around and saw that same bright light coming from that area. I had asked him if it looked like the light we saw, and he said it did. So it's definitely something worth checking out. So we go out there and look around. It seems like there was some activity where we seen the light, but honestly, we just don't know. That's all I have to say about that. I also had a similar story happen to me once I was out there with my friends. It was summer, and we were driving around of town, looking for somewhere to go. We came across this old abandoned farmhouse off the side of the road, like the old abandoned mental hospital. We had always wanted to check it out, so we went for it. Now, as soon as we get out of the car, just like before, we hear loud banging on the inside. There was someone or something in there trying to get out. All four of us got back in the car and fled. Now, it could have just been somebody, but chances are, why would there be somebody living there, in this old, dilapidated farmhouse in the middle of nowhere in Iowa? It just didn't make any sense. I've been debating about sharing my experience with this thing that has been stalking my husband and I at night. It all began with some weird sounds and howls, but then the howls became more aggressive. The next morning, we looked around the yard, and there were these large paw prints. My husband and I were really freaked out. Fast forward to 2 different times. When my husband and I were in bed, I've heard a growl. I've also seen 2 orange eyes, and my husband also believes he can hear werewolves. He can sense this thing. He believes it's a werewolf, but I don't. There's something different about it. I don't know, I don't think it can be a werewolf. I don't necessarily believe people can shapeshift like that, but then again, truth is stranger than fiction. Just look at the world we live in and what's happening. Anyway, I digress. The next morning, we looked around, and we found more paw prints in the backyard. We did not see it, but we had a feeling it was there, watching us, waiting for the right moment. My husband has a friend who also claims to have seen a werewolf, so we went over to his house to see if he could sense it as well. My husband claims that he could not sense this creature around that area, but we're not too far away and we border the same forest, so it makes you wonder. We've also had a string of strange paranormal occurrences. For example, I'll get strange phone calls in the middle of the night with nobody there, and it's these weird static noises. I've even heard these deep growls when I pick up the phone. I'm not saying it's the creature calling me. What I am saying, though, is it might be a demon or some sort of ghost. I don't know. I don't really know how to explain it. I'm pretty sure, though, that one time, when my husband was in the shower, I was looking off in the backyard and I saw the thing. It sped off, but I managed to see the back of it. It looked like a large wolf, but with no tail, and it was tall and upright. It had a very skinny body, and I don't recall seeing any fur. Its flesh, from what I remember, was more mange. I think it might have been a werewolf, but again, I don't know. I have a hard time buying into that concept. I don't know if it's a dogman or a werewolf or something else. I just know it's something stalking us. What should we do? Please help us. Thank you. When I was 12, my mom decided to send me to a Catholic boarding school on the southern side of Iowa. The school was located in a very old farmhouse, which had been slightly renovated. Anyway, it was in the middle of nowhere, and had been very recently purchased by the Catholic Church. I will never forget the first night I heard this Dogman. I was in the upstairs of the house, in one of the dorm rooms. It was very late at night. I had been awakened by a loud growl, coming from across the hall. I had never heard anything like this before. I was petrified. As I lay there, trying to calm my breathing, I heard the growl again. It was coming from the windows, and it seemed to be getting louder and closer. I then heard something jump up on the windowsill, jumping off and landing. I was paralyzed with fear, and at this point, was in a state of shock. The growl continued, coming from all around outside, and I could hear it walking around, sniffing. Now, this room that I was in had a very old heater vent that ran from the floor to the ceiling, and I could tell it was letting off this strange old smell. The creature must have smelt it. I could hear it sniffling. Anyway, after what seemed like an eternity, the creature stopped altogether. I did not hear it anymore, and when I felt like it was safe, I ran downstairs and just tried to tell somebody, but they completely dismissed me. After going back up to bed, I just laid there in the dark for a few moments, until I was able to move. I never heard, saw, or witnessed this creature again, and I never wanted to. My girlfriend and I were driving along in the middle of the night, after a long night of partying, when you see this large dog-like creature running right across the road. The creature had large ears, a long snout, and large eyes. It had a thick furry tail and was running on all fours. It reminded me of a cross between a wolf and a bear. There were large trees to the left of the road, and the creature darted from behind the tree into a cornfield on the other side of the road. We were both stunned by what we saw, and did not say a word for about 10 minutes. After we finally got our wits about us, we talked about what we saw and began to do some research on possible sightings in the area. We eventually discovered that there have been several Dogman sightings around the Cedar Rapids area. Now, some other strange things have been going on, like strange lights in the sky. We think there might be something strange going on there. I've since done some research and have discovered Dogmen have been sighted in many of the other areas as well. I would love to tell you more, but I have to get back to work now. I wish I had more time to tell you about all the strange things that go on around here. And Iowa itself is a pretty creepy state, if you only knew half of the things that went on. Not just strange wolf-like creatures, but the ghosts and demons and hauntings. I think that's all I can really say. Anyway, if you're doing some more paranormal research, keep an eye on Iowa. I have a feeling that Iowa is not done yet. I don't really tell this to too many people because they'll laugh at me and call me crazy. But I feel like after listening to all your episodes, you're one of the very few people that would actually believe me. I was in my late teens. This was around 2008. I was coming back from a friend's house at around 2:30 in the morning and was driving down a backcountry road. I came to a stop sign and stopped. That's when I see this strange, big black dog creature moving. It had a tail and canine legs and a wolf-like head. It moved fast. In fact, so much so, I was simply stunned by what I was seeing and was afraid to continue driving, actually. And I ended up turning around and going back to my friend's house. After that, I was too afraid to drive anymore by myself, so I didn't really go back out much after that happened. I've always wondered if that thing was out hunting me, or if we just happened to cross paths. I'm not sure if I believe in the whole Dogman legends, but I know what I saw that night wasn't a normal dog. It was not a wolf either. This was much bigger and moved like nothing I've ever seen. I hope you can use my story on your show. I know you have a lot of listeners, and I hope somebody out there can help me figure out what this thing was. It was no doubt possibly some sort of paranormal creature. Maybe a dogman? I don't know. This happened back in July of 1992. I was only 13 years old. I was busy spending the night at my best friend's house. We snuck out to a field to have a campfire. The field was bordered by a cornfield, woods, and a railroad track. I was on the lookout for trains since the train ran right by the field. I suddenly heard a growl coming from the cornfield. At first, I thought it was a dog, but the growl was far too deep. I then looked at the tracks, and there was this tall, slim man standing next to the tracks. He was kind of standing in a crouch and had his hands on his knees and was staring in my direction. I was terrified. He stood up and started walking toward me on all fours. I then heard him growl. It was this thing I would never forget. After that, he ran off in the opposite directions on all fours. I don't know if he was trying to scare me or what. I then heard a train coming and thought it was going to hit me. I ran back to my friend's house. When I got back to his house, his dad was outside looking for us. We told him what had happened, but he did not believe us. I don't blame him. We had snuck out. We then went back to the field and nobody was there. We were not allowed to hang out there again. I still can't believe what I saw. I'm glad I'm alive. My friend and I never really talked about what had happened, though, until very recently. I'm scared something bad is going to happen. I'm trying to be more open about it, but it's hard to when this sort of thing happens. Anyway, whatever it looked like, it was this strange animal-looking person. Like, if you mixed a wolf and an animal together, and a person, that's kind of what it reminded me of. But it was very strange, and forgive me because I suck at descriptions. So you're probably laughing at me. That's okay. But I'm trying to give you my best description. Anyway, besides all that, maybe you can help me figure out what I saw. Or maybe it was just some crazy man. Living here in Iowa will sometimes drive you crazy. People here can sometimes have a reputation for being crazy anyways. I have a friend who was a veterinarian and had clients who had regular appointments with him. It was kind of his thing to visit them and their animals. Well, one client in particular had a Great Dane, which had been rescued from a house fire. This dog would not get along with any other dog. They were trying to, at one point or another, adopt the dog out, but had no luck. One day, they were at their appointment and the dog was in the home. They heard loud barking and then a crash. They looked out the window and saw the dog and this large wolf on the front lawn fighting. The woman ran out the door to drive this wolf thing off the property, and the wolf took off running. The dog came back in the house with claw marks, gashes, and a broken leg. The vet was able to fix the leg, but the dog was never the same. Had the woman or owner not intervened, the dog would have been dead. The vet said that the size and weight of the animal was far too great for a wolf. The vet also said that the animal had a tail like a dog and the ears were pointed. He had never seen anything like it. Now, the owner really enjoyed traveling, and much of the time, the dog was kept at home in a kennel. They had a neighbor who was a hunter who would check up on the dog and kind of help take care of it. She felt safe. Now, during this, when the neighbor went to check on the dog outside, he had found the dog had broken the kennel open and was gone. The neighbor found the neighbor next door and asked if he had seen the dog. That neighbor said that he had seen the dog last it was running down the road. I guess he wasn't sure why. He also heard a loud yelp, and shortly after, looked and saw the strange wolf monster running after the dog. The neighbor had a rifle and ran to get it before shooting at this thing. He hit the creature several times, but the creature kept chasing after the dog. The neighbor also kept a trail cam out there, but somehow did not end up taking any of the pictures. He was sure it was something other than a wolf, but would not be sure what it was. He didn't know what to think. Either did the owner or the veterinarian.